pardon me, we have the red light. I'd like to welcome everyone to our regular Cowichan Valley Regional District Board meeting of February the 12th. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the Vice Chair of the Regional District, and I will be chairing tonight's board meeting. I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here for this meeting in the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. I'd like to welcome Alternate Director Manhas to our meeting tonight. Hope that Director Smith is feeling better soon. I would like to ask if everyone who has electronic devices, which is probably just about everyone, to turn them to silent or off, if you would. And I won't say the thing about the Caps game, Director Sebring. So with that, technically, we've already adopted the agenda, but haven't asked if there's any of the directors have any additional items that they would like to add. Seeing none, we can proceed. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item M1 is adoption of the regular board meeting minutes of January 22nd, 2020.
Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No business arising, so public input period.
This is the part where we welcome members of the public to our board meeting and ask if you have any input for the directors on items on our agenda for tonight. Do we have any takers? I won't call it 3 times. I don't see anybody rushing towards the microphone, so next item, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegations, item D1 is Krista Fox, Chair, and Gretchen Hartley, Executive Director, Cowichan Hospice, regarding an update on the Cowichan Hospice House for information.
Welcome back. You have 10 minutes.
It's nice to be here. And everyone can see my face above. Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman and Directors, thank you for providing us with the opportunity to speak with you today. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we are here today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Cowichan people. I also want to express gratitude to the Cowichan people for stewarding these lands for generations. My name is Krista Fox. I'm a Cowichan Hospice Board member, and I am the chair of the Cowichan Hospice House Task Force. With me is Gretchen Hartley. I'm sure all of you know Gretchen. She's the executive director of Cowichan Hospice. We're here today to express our deep gratitude for your most generous contributions. This is not good. For your most generous contributions in the form of annual operational funding and capital funding in support of the construction of Cowichan Hospice House. This local government's compassionate support of its regional citizens at the end of life is beyond words. A deep and humble thank you from all of us. The CVRD's support has paved the way through your early leadership, starting in 2015 with the previous council, to make Cowichan Hospice House a reality. The CVRHD's support has been a major catalyst in the joining together of our whole community to build Cowichan Hospice House. A hospice house for Cowichan is very much needed. The Cowichan region is the only community of our size on the island without a residential hospice program. Many people in Cowichan are cared for at home at the end of their lives. But sometimes there's no one available around the clock, or care may become too complex to be managed by family members. Sometimes caregivers become too exhausted to continue. In these situations, Most people end up being cared for in our aging and overcrowded hospital. Cowichan Hospice House is a companion project to the new hospital. It will immediately provide a more appropriate and cost-effective option for those who cannot be cared for at home at the end of their lives and who don't need acute care in the hospital. Hospice palliative care is whole person care for people living with advancing illnesses. It includes special medical care as well as addressing social, emotional, and spiritual needs. The focus is on quality of life rather than a cure. It is care-based on the dying person's own goals and priorities. It's collaborative care that involves and supports family and caregivers throughout bereavement. Hospice palliative care offers the possibility of autonomy, dignity, and joy at the end of life. Thank you, each and every one of you, for making this care possible. Oh, I forgot. Okay. How do I just have, I apologize. There we go. All right. This slide of the sod turning event last July is a testament of the many partnerships that came together to turn this critical need in Cowichan into a reality. It truly is this Cowichan community that is raising the hospice house with the amazing gifts of time, expertise, and funds. Jen. I did. Okay.
Next.
I tried that.
It seems to be frozen.
What you can just do is just click on, you want to go to the next
Yeah,
one?
but it wouldn't. Okay.
Magic touch.
In case you haven't had a chance to pass by the construction site, we have some time-lapse footage from September to December to view. Okay. Why won't...
Click on there. Did they use the, is this the PDF?
Here it goes.
Ooh, it's
Oh, it's moving. All right. 40 seconds of construction happening. So this is from September to December that you're viewing what has been happening. It's so exciting. I drive past there occasionally just to see where we're doing. Okay. So we really are on our way from this time-lapse footage. And even with the challenging weather, the project is still on schedule. So right now, we're at a point where their windows are installed, BC Hydro has completed their work, the mechanical and electrical rough-ins are being installed and are on schedule. The majority of the underground site work has been completed. We meet and collaborate with Island Health and the construction team on a regular basis, either at the site or at the hospice offices. Everyone on the building team respects and honors what this community has accomplished. This is evident by the care they take in their work and their commitment to build a center of excellence in accordance to the task force mission to build our community a centralized hospice facility that provides excellent palliative care for everyone, every time, everywhere in the Cowichan region. We hope to open the Cowichan Hospice House in October of this year. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Gretchen.
Hello.
Just before you get started, Gretchen, I'm going to turn to committee and ask if we would grant them an extension to complete their move by Director Kuhn, second by Director Yanni Tenardo. All those in favor? None opposed? Motion carries. Floor is yours. Take her away.
Okay, thank you. So, another shot of the inside there. So I too want to add my voice to Krista's in deep appreciation for the understanding and the commitment of the CVRD for many, many years of the need and the willingness to step up to meet that need for better end-of-life care and better bereavement care for people. Those stats are from 2019, kind of rounded up stats, and speaks to the impact that the core piece of anchor funding that is a service function speaks to the impact of that funding.
Gretchen, could I ask you to aim the mic more towards? Yes,
Right,
perfect.
forgot about that. Were
Thank
you
you.
reading my lips?
All the folks at home can hear you too.
Okay. So last year, actually, there were 1,000 people who received one or more hospice services. So the numbers have grown over the years, and amazing that we've reached that number. More than your funding helps to leverage 5.7 staff, but that also triggers the work of over 100 volunteers, and we estimate that they contribute about $200,000 a year worth of value. So those are the kinds of numbers we're talking about. It's very impactful. Let's see what we've got here. So last year we piloted a traumatic loss bereavement group. There's a quote here from a woman that was in the group who lost her 6-year-old niece tragically and unexpectedly, and was really in a difficult place when someone referred her to Cowichan Hospice. So she had some one-to-one support for a time, and then joined this new 8-week traumatic loss support group. And so as you can see from her quote, she felt that it really helped her to be able to see who she was again, touch the joy that's in her life. She'll never, of course, get over the loss of her niece, but really helped her to move back into her life. So thank you for that. That's huge. In this January, we are starting to pilot a new program called NavCare, which is originated at UBC Okanagan. Dr. Barb Pessett has developed this program over a number of years. What it does is really enhance the work of our palliative volunteers to provide upstream support for people living with chronic illness or serious illness who are still at home. And it really helps to support people staying at home by supporting their quality of life. So we especially trained 6 of our experienced volunteers to kind of add on to the skill base they have. The NavCare program has a focus on navigating the system, which is often confusing for people shortly after diagnosis. They're wondering where to go and what to do and what the resources are. But there's also a bigger emphasis on supporting social connectedness. Sometimes someone's isolated because their spouse has died or because their illness is limiting how much they can move around the community or how much they can move around their home. So volunteers are there to identify resources, but also to provide personal support, one-to-one support. As I said, we're going to pilot this year, and I'm hoping that we can be back next year with some stories about the impact that this has made. So once again, your anchor funding is key. It's going to support care in the hospice. As you probably know, Island Health provides that medical care, but there will be Cowichan Hospice staff and volunteers, making sure that the family is well supported and providing the wraparound whole person care. So thank you all for making a huge difference. And questions, I guess.
Thank you so much, Gretchen and Krista. And would you be available for a couple of questions? I've got a couple of directors would like to pose one or two or make a comment, and I'll start with Director McGonigal.
Thank you. I'm humbled and honored to accept your thanks, but I also want to extend my thanks for your passion in this project, to you and your board for bringing this forward on a previous board that I sat on in your initial presentation and encouraging us that this truly is a regional need. And I think we embrace that moving forward, and I give kudos to my colleagues around this table who have saw this as a very worthy extension of end-of-life care. I thank you very much.
Thank you. And I do have to say, it's a whole community effort, right? Lots and lots of people.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo what Director McGonigal has said. Thank you very much, not just for the organisation, but for who you are and what you do. It's incredible. I wonder if you'd mind just speaking very briefly about legacy planning that we just talked about just now, for the benefit of somebody over the back there, which we talked earlier on about maybe helping hospice out at the end of your normal life with wills and legacies that you might be left behind for the hospice to use.
So are you talking about gifts?
Yeah.
Gifts that people might leave us in their will?
Yeah.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
We also have in the last 2 years set up an endowment fund, so there's another option for people who want to leave a gift that remains in perpetuity, but that the interest would support programs.
Good, good. And one follow-up, if I could, just to inject a little bit of lightness into here, and a little bit of advertising. We all know that, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Here it is here. I've got the tickets here. The prizes are really good. The first early bird draw, I think, is this Saturday, Friday. $4,000 diamond ring Saturday.
I thought it was Valentine's Day.
If you don't have cash, I will take IOUs. But if you need tickets, come see me.
Trusting soul.
And I'm thinking that Director Wilson has explained that the area Rotary clubs have taken on fundraising for the garden, so that will be built once the hospice is complete.
Actually, I'm telling people don't buy any tickets because I've got 5 and I'm going to win. But
There we go.
buy them.
Director Staples.
Yeah, also echoing what has been said to this point, and I just want to acknowledge the appreciation that I gained going up to the hospice where you're at now and the offices, and just having the opportunity to spend some time there. And just as soon as you walk into that space, you're immediately relaxed and welcomed, and you know, all of you just set that tone of environment that welcomes people into a healing space. And I felt that even just going into your offices, and I drive by or walk by the construction site every day and think about what you're doing there and why every time I go by there. And I want to thank you for bringing that awareness to all of us and for everything that you do for our community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, I wanted to say that your community has really embraced us. It is wonderful when we have met with community members in Cairnsmore who have really wanted this project to happen in their community. They welcome it. They're ready to support. It's really beautiful. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, now 3 baby trees started from the apple tree that was cut down, so that was a
Yeah.
wonderful initiative. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
planted in the local neighborhood. So.
That's just fantastic, and I just want to close up by saying that I was looking at the big group photo at the beginning there, and it's kind of funny because I spotted one of our directors in a very bright blue dress, and it was Director Toporowski. I was standing next to her at that photo. It was a great shot, but I just want to relate that in almost, it seems like a different lifetime ago, Director Toporowski wrangled a bunch of folks together when dragged us up to the Hike for Hospice up at Providence Farm years ago, and I've been a big supporter ever since, and want to thank you and congratulate you for all the hard work that you've done, and thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item D2 is a delegation, Robert Louis Manning, President of the Chamber of Shipping, for presentation on ships anchoring in the vicinity of the Southern Gulf Islands and local Vancouver Island communities for information.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and board members. Thanks for taking, or allowing me 10 minutes to talk to you about something, especially after touching a nerve on such an important subject. And oddly enough, my father just passed, and I'm by birth a patron of the Louis Manning Hospice in Poole, England. So I'm going there in a month to scatter his ashes there. So it's I'm going to come back, I think, but it certainly touched a nerve. I'd like to talk to you about something that's important, I think, in your communities, the communities of First Nations in this area. And obviously something that's important in Canadian trade. I know that the board has already heard from a local community group, at least one, maybe more. They're a pretty bright bunch. We talk frequently. One of them is here this evening, at least one. So this is probably not a new issue for you. I suspect many of you live or have constituents that live near the water and see ships at night, at daytime. If you were to look out of Ladysmith or Cowichan Bay tonight, you'd see 24 ships in the Southern Gulf Islands. It's packed, and that's for a number of different reasons, which I'll try to talk to and synthesize very quickly in 10 minutes. Now it's my turn to have IT challenges. I'm sorry if I insult any mariners in the room or boaters who know all this stuff, but just very quickly, why ships anchor and what they're looking for. Anchorages provide shelter. It's a safe place to park a ship while it waits for something. And it just happens to be that our local waters, and I say our because I live in Saanich, so I'm not too far away, provides a lot of the good things that help keep a ship safe. The right depth, the right type of holding bottom, mud and sand, vice rock, shelter from the wind, and enough room for a big ship. And the ships have got bigger over time. Those ships, it's not really the Wild West. They are a regulated sector. They have rules that they must comply with. They're inspected. They're navigated in local waters by a group of 100 highly trained, highly experienced pilots who are very accustomed to operating in our waters. They're all here waiting for cargo of some sort, and largely ships that you would see in your neighborhood are waiting for bulk products. They're waiting for things like grain, coal, potash, large exports that are mostly going to Asia. And that has been that way, and it will likely be that way for some time. Over time, and largely for economies of scale, ships have got larger. And it has had a consequential impact to anchoring operations. Bigger ships need more space. There's less flexibility of where to anchor a larger ship. And it takes a lot longer to fill a ship with the cargo that it's going to receive than it did smaller ships a decade ago. So some of the ships you will see are going to terminals, largely in Vancouver, more than once and coming back to anchor and going a second and third time sometimes. And because they're larger, they're also looking for the commodity to be in the same quality. So wherever that commodity is coming from, somewhere inland in Canada, and sometimes in the US, it has to come in the right type in the right volume. So the equation of how to get the cargo to the ship has become more complex over time. You know this chart very well. That's a few days ago, that screen capture, but it hasn't changed much since 3 days ago when I took it. Those areas in the southern Gulf Islands, everywhere you see a green circle, except for maybe one, are all ships at anchor. And you can see some of them are very far away from the terminals where they load cargo. And that's not good for trade either. That's time delay, cost. And I guess my message to you is industry actually doesn't want ships in those locations. It would like to have ships closer to terminals in order to reduce the time and also to have a more responsive supply chain when the cargoes are ready to be loaded. This is probably a very simplistic picture graph of how the cargo meets the ship. And the ship, wherever it's coming from, has to sail here, and then it has to go through a number of inspections. And the thing that's the most important for a ship is it has to get a declaration that's ready to receive the cargo. And it has to go through a number of inspections, and they happen largely at anchor here before it can receive the cargo. In the meantime, that cargo is coming from somewhere in Canada. It's dealing with bad weather, congestion on railways, congestion in ports, and it all has to be timed. The imperfect nature of this relationship is reflected in a commercial contract. And the length of time that you see a ship in Cowichan Bay, for example, is directly related to this inefficiency in the commercial relationship. Now, I'm not making excuses, it's just a fact. And sometimes it works really well, and like now, where it's absolutely terrible. And that's largely from a rail strike in September, a landslide, a train derailment, and now disruption in rail service from protests. And I'm sorry, it's probably not going to change much for the next 2 or 3 months because of that confluence of issues. But that's the challenge that we all face in trying to improve this situation. A little bit about policy development. I think you've probably heard some details about this previously, late last year, from community groups. It's been slow. This problem was about 1.5 decades in the making, and it feels very slow in trying to find solutions. I think part of that is it hasn't had a lot of visibility for a while, and I think some of the advocacy of community groups has helped to get some visibility. I was just mentioning to someone in the audience that this is a top 3 issue for our industry. And when I say our industry, it's not just the shipping side, it's also the cargo side of the supply chain as well. So this is an important issue. We are going to put even more resources into trying to find solutions. And ultimately, we would like to find better places to anchor ships that are good for trade and less impactful on the ecosystem and cultural and social sensitivities. It's a difficult equation. The other real challenge is quite frankly, there's not a lot of expertise within our main regulator at the moment with this subject. So there's a lot of learning going on. And that learning is also complicated by a lot of turnover in government to help fix this problem. There probably is going to need some regulatory support to make this a better situation. And that takes some time. Hopefully it doesn't take too much time. We're spending a lot of time also getting the ports involved. Ultimately, all these ships are headed to terminals in the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. And we're happy now that the port is involved. It's a major step to have their involvement. And we're trying to now get regional support in order to look at better options than the status quo. And I guess I probably should have mentioned that inside Port Authority boundaries, whether it were Nanaimo or Vancouver, those ports actually manage anchorages within their boundaries. External to those boundaries, it's the responsibility of Transport Canada. So there are jurisdictional boundaries here that complicate this even further. Possible solutions, I think in the very, very short term, monitoring is a very important piece. Quite rightly, a lot of citizens in this district have concerns about safety, regulatory authority, regulatory compliance, and you don't get what you don't inspect, so you need to have on-the-water presence. And we hope that there are enough government resources already on the water and where we live that could happen relatively quickly. So that's an ongoing discussion. We think there needs to be the capacity to actually designate anchorages. And believe it or not, this doesn't exist in Canada. Anybody can anchor a 30-foot sailboat or a 300-meter container ship where they like by law. But we think that context is a bit outdated now, that there actually needs to be process related to where it's suitable to anchor a vessel, where the impacts are managed in a responsible way for the long term. And that is going to need oversight and a management plan. So the industry is very supportive of that. In fact, it would like it sooner than later, because at the moment, even the trade is vulnerable. And frankly, if there are impacts on communities, that isn't good either.
Robert, just hang on a second. I think
already
the
over?
committee would like to see you wrap up, but we're out of time, so I would entertain a resolution to extend the period. Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director McGonigal. Any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed? Please continue.
Thanks, and I'll be very quick, probably 30 seconds. Perhaps if you might consider it, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I think if you might consider it, your involvement from a supportive perspective with the Minister of Transport would be helpful. And I think the points that I've outlined in this slide are the key ones, and you have those, so I think you can consider them in your own time. But short-term and long-term is very important, and without process and probably a legislative change to the Canada Shipping Act, I don't think that we have easy solutions that are going to be implementable within the 18 months. But I think there is the possibility of doing this with the right focus on small wins very quickly. So I won't go into all those details. You can read them. And that's my 30-second overtime, so I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
Very well done, and I'm sure we have some questions. I've got a small speakers list started. I've got Directors Yanni DiNardo, Sebring, and Wilson. Would anyone else like to join the list? Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Lewis Manning, thank you very much for your presentation. It has been something that has been a hot topic in my community for quite some time. And of course, you would know the Cowichan Bay Ship Watch. And the chair indulged me. I had 10 questions, but I think I'm allowed 4. So I have a few questions for you, maybe 2 at a time, and then come back to me. Is that what it was? Sure. The question number 1 is, the impact of these anchorages on residents' quality of life is well publicized, and the anchorages currently are nearly full, but there are environmental concerns for the larger community as well. How comfortable are you with the quantity of ships sitting in these areas for the environmental safety perspective?
Thank you for the question. So I'll parse that out into 2 pieces. On the safety side, I'm very comfortable that there are checks and balances to address safety concerns, with one exception. Additional monitoring. There is some remote monitoring, but additional monitoring would be another layer. And I don't think this is rocket science. When weather gets bad, you need a heightened sense of monitoring, and that's when it counts. From an environmental perspective, I think there are valid concerns, and our previous recommendations to the Minister of Transport have asked for some type of environmental assessment and social and cultural to be part of a developing management plan. So having, for example, especially in Cowichan Bay, having a ship continuously return to the same location has impacts on the environment and quality of life for residents. So a management plan should be able to address some of that, maybe not all of it. So in short, supportive of the need to do that, not quite sure how we get to that point yet.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question, what is the cost to the industry, and who are the winners and losers economically? We've heard that loading grain in the rain is an issue. That's what I've learned a lot about freighters. And there are steps being taken to alleviate this holdup. And are there steps that are being taken?
So weather is certainly a factor, both.
So is that still true? The grain can't be transferred when it's raining? They don't
It is
have
in some
covers?
cases.
Oh.
So there is development in terminals to address loading in foul weather. But there are still terminals that are unable to do it, which is a problem. So, for example, that'd be a great place for private and probably private investment. And I think the impetus is there because, of course, the seller of the commodity wants to get it on the ship as fast as possible, right? So ships sitting around is inefficiency for the exporter.
And is there any money is there any economic value for us as Canadians that they sit there? Do we get any money for them sitting there, or is there anything that passes? Like, there's no cost, it's actually free parking, right? Cowichan Bay is kind of known for that.
Yeah, well, from the perspective of a resident in Cowichan Bay, yes, absolutely. From the ship owner's perspective, no. It's a bad place to anchor economically, right? Being close to a terminal is where you want to anchor a ship. You want to be able to be responsive to the loading process, and you want to reduce the time that it takes. And we want to reduce the number of transit that a vessel is taking. So there is some common objectives, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two more later.
I'll
I'll come back.
Put you at the bottom
Thank
of
you.
the list, Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lewis Manning. When I was at FCM in Quebec City last year, I was talking to the head of Ports Canada, and I'm a little confused between what he told me and what I just heard from you with respect to regulation. Ports of Nanaimo and Vancouver, as you said, regulate within their areas, but once we get into what's been called the Wild West in terms of territory, there's no regulation at all? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Thank you. There is regulation. So the Canada Shipping Act outlines the behavior of ships in any state, whether they're in transit or at anchor.
Does that behavior include time limits on a particular spot? Because that was the impression I got from that conversation in Quebec City, to which I responded, if there's time limits, they're breaking those limits. And
Well, I think you know the answer to that. The answer is no. However, international law, which Canada has committed to under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, does state that it has to be for a reasonable time period. So I can't tell you what reasonable time period is. It's certainly not a month. And I don't think anybody would dispute that. I think that's part of the challenge is those types of things need to be defined. And over time, commercial contracts, the commercial aspects would likely to adjust to those types of changes.
Are there time limits within the boundaries of the ports of Vancouver and Nanaimo?
There are. So
Okay, maybe that was the confusion, because I had the impression there were time limits.
Yeah, there are time limits in those ports, 7 days for the Port of Vancouver and 10 days in the Port of Nanaimo. And the unfortunate reality is we see ships bouncing from port to port and to the Southern Gulf Islands / Vancouver Island because of those limits. And I think the part that isn't working is if you're not looking at all of those holistically, then you're possibly inducing more risk from more transits, inducing more cost from more transits, and inducing more impact on communities. Because getting bumped out of an anchorage in Vancouver at 7 p.m. and going to anchor in Cowichan Bay at 3 a.m. is not what anybody wants, because the anchor coming out of the ship is noisy.
Yeah, thank you.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit confused about this, the Wild West reference as well, that you said that they could anchor anywhere? Is that right, or did I hear it wrong?
There's nothing stopping a vessel or a small boat from anchoring anywhere that isn't restricted already from some other process. So there are places that no boat or ship is allowed to anchor.
Okay, yeah.
And, there are protected areas that aren't where no ships are allowed to anchor or boats.
Okay,
So,
yeah, okay.
but it's a constraint, not a
Yeah, okay.
not a permission.
Okay, but I know that there are designated anchorage areas, which is what we've got down in Cow Bay and places like that, where they're allowed to.
The interesting part of that is designated, when you see for those that look at charts, when you see a symbol of an anchor, that's actually meant as a warning to other mariners that ships can do anchor there frequently. It's not necessarily a permission either.
Okay. And one final follow-up. The ships that are there, they're mainly waiting for their cargoes. Is it opposed to just ships that are waiting a cargo, or maybe just waiting for any kind of contract? I mean, can they come in and park and just wait there, even if they're not expecting a cargo?
It's a great question. Technically, they could. I can't think of anywhere in Canada where that happens. Largely because the places where cargoes are exported are very far away.
Yeah.
If we were sitting in Singapore, you would see 1,000 ships at anchor waiting for contracts.
Been there.
So it's completely different.
Yeah, and one final thing, as far as I understand it as well, if you move a ship from, let's say, anywhere within the coastal waters of Canada, the 12 nautical mile, you have to take a pilot if it's over a certain tonnage. So the pilots would still have to board every time they move from, let's say, Vancouver to Cow Bay?
Your assumption is almost correct. So the distance is, I won't go into the details about that, but certainly with the area we're talking about, there is always a pilot on board the ship.
Good, thank you.
And I think I'll just insert myself very quickly before we go back to Director Yanni DiNardo. So I believe input from local government was sought just recently, and you'd sort of indicated that there's some regulatory and perhaps legislative changes that are being contemplated as we speak. So is there a process, or is there a timeline that you are aware of that's contemplating some of the concerns that have been raised by community groups and organizations like your own?
I wish I could be, it's a great question. I wish there could be more optimistic. I'm not sure if anything is being contemplated, to be quite frank. But I do know that this is a dedicated program under the Oceans Protection Plan, which Transport Canada is leading, and there's likely another 1.5 years of opportunity to leverage that program. So I think where there is alignment among interests, even if the lens that people are looking at is different, it's probably the best opportunity that I've seen in the last decade and we will see in the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Director Kuhn?
Do you know any examples of how, if Anchorage is free or if it is charged in other countries?
There are both, certainly, yes. So there are market examples, and you know, I often get this question, so can charging be a disincentive for using it? It certainly could be if that were interest. I mean, the reality...
Would there be a negative effect, do you think?
Well, it really depends on the cost. I think commercially, markets adjust to different costs. So there would likely be a market adjustment. And can I put my hand over my heart and all of a sudden say wheat out of Saskatchewan would be uncompetitive? I can't. I'd be speculating.
I find it almost unbelievable that a big vessel could park anywhere and just sit there. I think there should be, I don't know, some fee paid either to local government or to government or whatever, or and if it is only for compensation of some of the environmental degradation that they cause.
I'm definitely not here to tell you that there's a reluctance to pay for anchorages. I think obviously I can't speak on behalf of constituents in the region, but I think there is also a discussion that's happened in the past that would say, if one starts accepting that, then you're accepting the anchorages. So, I think we're sensitive to the fact that that would be a concern of a lot of constituents as well.
And I think in the grand scheme of things, if there were to be a fee or a charge, that we'd be third in line, not first. So turn to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you again to Mr. Lewis Manning. Are ships on board generators used for power generation while at anchor required to run at full capacity to maintain systems, or are they capable of reducing power/noise to maintain essential services? And to what degree can they be turned down?
Thank you. Well, that's a, you can tell I'm not an engineer in my response. But I have done a fair amount of sailing in my time. So ships have a diesel generator. They'll have more than one. Generally, when a ship's at anchor, they'll run on a single diesel generator. And it's really twofold. It's to provide hospital services, lights, heat, whatever it may be, and to run fire pumps, because it's a big, complex piece of machine that has to be ready to respond to an emergency. So that's the two main reasons a diesel runs. Unfortunately, and if there are engineers in the room, I think they'll nod their heads, diesels like to run at a high RPM, not a low RPM, or they don't work very well over time. And I can't tell you whether a ship in Cowichan Bay is working at 50% horsepower or 90% horsepower. Do they have the ability to lower them? Yes, absolutely. I don't think there's been any work that I'm aware of to try and measure that, but it's possible.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question, what is considered to be an acceptable risk and harm level for potential contaminants from ships at anchor in low flush, high sensitive southern Gulf Island bays and channels, and what studies have been done to date?
Thank you for another tough question.
Yeah, she's got some tough ones.
I was only allowed 4, but
Well, I'll be around afterwards.
okay.
So I think your question relates to tolerance, and I would say there's probably zero tolerance, right? Nobody wants to damage the environment, affect people's lives, whether you're a citizen or the ship owner. What studies have been done? And are you referring to studies related to safety or environmental, cultural, social impact?
I would think both.
The studies on safety are probably fairly outdated. I imagine within the last decade, but I'd have to confirm that. As far as environmental assessments, I'm not aware of any, but I imagine that the work that Parks Canada is doing around establishing the National Marine Conservation Area in the Southern Gulf Islands is probably doing that work. I'd be surprised if it was not.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Director
all,
Yan.
if that's all I'm allowed.
Those were pretty tough questions, I
Okay.
think. Are there any other directors that would like to pose any questions to our delegate? Seeing none, I thank you very much for coming here today, and that was very informative, and I'm glad that you could bring the perspective of the ship owners and to us today for information. So thank you very much. Ms. Legault, what's next up? Oh, yes, let's just do a very quick report from the chair. I don't get this opportunity very often, so I just wanted to report really quickly, and I've got a surprise test for some of the folks that were at LGLA last week. There was an electoral area forum on Tuesday and Wednesday in Richmond, and they had some good information. They brought forward some information on affordable housing, and I learned a new acronym, STIRS, short-term rentals. So there was some great information on that and a lot of work being done. And we also had some updates on emergency health services and the whole idea of how a lot of our volunteer fire departments assist in the delivery of people to hospital and their assistance in the ambulance service. And we learned a little bit about the Community Resiliency Investment Program, and there was an update on that. So it was a very good, informative forum, and we can likely discuss more of the electoral area specific things at an EAS meeting. But at this time, I just wanted to take an opportunity to ask those that were at the LGLA, which was the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, if you had any brief comments on on your experience there. And perhaps, Director Wilson, you were there. Would you like to share a few words or got something to share for us?
I was there, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it immensely. I learned a huge amount. I also learned a lot of things that I wasn't happy about. I'm not going to say I was 100% in favour of everything that was going on there, but no, it was very, very interesting. And I'd certainly go again for more updates. It's very good.
Great, thank you. Director Sebring.
You know, I attend 4 different conferences every year, and LGLA is always my favorite because it's about governance. It's about process. It's about learning how to do what we do and do it better. My favorite session, and I think you'd left by then, Mr. Chair, was we got about 30 of us in a room. It was fairly late in the day, so we'd had a long one because we started at 7 a.m. And the question was, what's the most difficult conversation you've had since you got elected, and how was it handled? And we sort of went around the room, and to sort of get the expertise of other people and learn some new strategies for dealing with some of these difficult things that we all face in these positions we hold. That alone was worth the price of admission. I really enjoyed the session, so we'll leave it there.
Excellent, thank you. Any, Director Kuhn?
Yeah, I learned something that I had heard a bit of it before, when the CEO of the Municipal Finance Association talked to us, and he mentioned that there is this pressure now on so-called green investing and all that, and he's looking after the reserve funds of the regions, and so he talked a bit about that, and what I found almost unbelievable was that some people had been in contact with him, telling him that no, he shouldn't buy any more Canada bonds because Trudeau invested in a pipeline, and that is not acceptable, and so Canada bonds are not environmentally acceptable anymore. And so anyway, I was absolutely amazed about that, and I thought, well, okay, where is this going to end? I mean, well, where are you going to put your money?
Thank you. Anyone else who attended? Any comments? Alternate Director Manhus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my second LGLA I attended. Last year we attended the first one as newly elected. Last year I guess was more about for new councillors, and but this year it was about inclusiveness and diversity. And I learned quite a few things about just the understanding different diverse opinions and suggestions around the table. Sometimes we take that for granted. We have, we're certain narrow-minded or fixed in our own opinions and beliefs, and I took that to heart, so. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Anyone else attended? I'll just add something to what Director Kuhn had said. That particular individual was cornered after his presentation, and I think a lot of us are interested in seeing our local government dollars, when they're invested, that they be in ethically invested portfolios and the like. And I have a little bit of background in this in my personal life, but the curious thing is there's a lot of no-go areas that they can't look at anymore, and that was a new one. And I think he said that could put at risk something like 30% of some of their portfolios, because Canadian Treasury bills are very important components of investments for the Municipal Finance Authority. And there's no investing in tobacco companies, no investing in carbon-based companies, no investing in war-type companies and that sort of thing. So it's an interesting, evolving world, and I think that it will grow and change a lot in the near future. And if you can be very brief, I'll let you close.
Just to add to this, he described how difficult it is to control that. So he says, let's say we bought the shares of one company, and that company then, because we are not part of the board, that company decides they'll buy the shares of another company, and that other company is not acceptable. So now, how far do the fingers reach into, and how long is it going to take to control every little aspect? No, through 4 different corners, they invested in this company, so we can't have it anymore. So anyway, he said it's getting so ridiculous, it's really hard.
Thank you very much. So that concludes report from the chair. Ms. Legault, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's no correspondence or information items, so committee and commission reports. CR1 is the report and recommendations of the Regional Services Committee meeting of January 22nd.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is that, 1, the bylaw number 4297, solid waste management charges and regulation amendment bylaw 2020 be considered for 3 readings and adoption. And number 2, that the corporate strategic asset management plan be approved.
Moving those items. Seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed.
That is my report, Mr. Chair.
Motion carries. Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On to staff reports. SR1 is a staff report from the Public Safety Division regarding proposed boundary extension for Honeymoon Bay Fire Protection Area. The recommendation for consideration is that, 1, that the certificate of sufficiency confirming that a sufficient petition requesting inclusion into the Honeymoon Bay Fire Service Area be received, and 2, that CVRD bylaw number 2085, Honeymoon Bay Volunteer Fire Department Establishment bylaw number 9, 1993, be amended to include the property described as PID 018871020.
And moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Just before you go on to the next one, do you know how hard it is to say sufficient petition a whole bunch of times? Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff report from the Water Management Division regarding Honeymoon Bay Drainage Service Area. And the recommendation for consideration is that the certificate of sufficiency confirming that a sufficient petition to establish the Honeymoon Bay Drainage Service within a portion of Electoral Area F, Cowichan Lake, South Scots Falls, be received. The service establishment bylaw for the Honeymoon Bay Drainage Service Area be prepared and forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings and adoption. And 3, that following adoption of the Drainage Service Establishment Bylaw, that the necessary management bylaws be prepared and forwarded to the board.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? There's none opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item SR3 is a staff report from the Public Safety Division regarding Community Emergency Preparedness Fund grant application. The recommendation for consideration is that a grant application in the amount of $25,000 be submitted to UBCM for the purchase of emergency support services equipment under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund initiative.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On to bylaws. Item B1, CVRD bylaw number 4297, Solid Waste Management Charges and Regulations Amendment Bylaw 2020 for first, second, and third readings.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? 1 opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CVRD bylaw number 4297 for adoption.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Nicholson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are any opposed? Director McGonigal opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B2, CVRD bylaw number 4315, Honeymoon Bay Fire Protection Service Area Amendment, Boundary Extension Bylaw 2020 for first, second, and third reading.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. That motion carries. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item B3, CVRD bylaw number 4316, Honeymoon Bay Drainage System Service Area Establishment Bylaw 2020 for first, second, and third readings.
Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. That will bring us down to question period. Is there anyone in the galleries that has any questions for the chair today? And they both nodded no. Wow, excellent. I think Director McGonigal was just seeing if I was watching there with those no votes, so with that,
You were good.
I think we're on to a motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Kuhn. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Satisfied.